I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story, because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old, old story of Jesus and His love.
A few years ago, there was a letter to Ann Landers from an obstetrician that I found particularly interesting. The obstetrician was complaining because he felt bad about something that he felt that he needed to do. He had a young woman who had just had a baby, and she had 3 children at home under the age of 5. Here was number 4. The delivery was fine, the baby's fine, everything's fine, but he didn't want to send her home yet. He thought that she could benefit by having an extra day of rest. But the only way that he could get her this day of rest paid for was to lie to the insurance company. And he was telling Ann about how he felt guilty about this, and he didn't feel that he should have to feel guilty about it. The insurance company should just take his word and do whatever he wanted them to do. Well, before you form a firm opinion about that obstetrician, let me tell you another story, and I'm going to put you into this story. Let's suppose that you have a meeting in downtown Jackson at an office building. It's a beautiful spring day, so you park your car in a lot and you decide that you're just going to walk. You're not going to get your car and drive. You're just going to walk to these places. For the rest of the day, you have a meeting at this office building, and then you have a luncheon meeting at the Elite Cafe. So you park your car in your lot. You go to the meeting in the office building at 11 o'clock. It's supposed to be over at 12. It's about 12:10, 12:15 when you finally get out. And so you're going to have to rush a little bit to get to your luncheon meeting at the Elite Cafe. But you need to stop at the bank ATM machine and get a little extra cash. Well, you get to the ATM machine and there's a woman standing at the ATM machine. And so you get behind her hoping that she won't take too long. And as you stand there, a guy comes up behind you and he starts talking with you. It's very nice. One of these people who talks to everybody, can talk to anybody, and you enjoy talking with him. So he's standing there behind you talking. And even when the lady in front of you leaves and you start getting your money from the machine, he continues to talk. And you start to walk away, he continues to talk. So it goes on for a few steps away. Then as you get to the Elite Cafe, just as you're getting there, there's a bench on the sidewalk, and there's a young couple on the bench with 2 little girls, 3 and 5 years old probably. And the mother is crying, the little girls are at her knees, and the daddy has his arm around her, trying to comfort her, and they're all upset. And they have a couple of black garbage bags with them, which you think are maybe their belongings. This may be everything that they have in the world. And so you want to stop and help. You want to do something for this young family, but you have this meeting in just a couple of minutes, and you can't be late. It's a very important meeting. So you go on into the Elite saying to yourself, Lord, I want to help them. If they're still there when I come out, then that's a sign to me that you want me to help them out. So you go to your meeting, you have your lunch, you finish everything, you come out the door, and just as you're coming out the door, that young family is walking in the door with the guy who was standing behind you at the ATM machine. And you say, well, Lord, this is great. This nice young man is bringing this couple in. He's going to feed them lunch. And so you've taken it. You have it under control. You don't need me. I'm on my way. Off you go. Well, a couple days later, you finally figure out the whole story and what happened. The guy behind you at the ATM machine got your passcode, and as you left, he picked your pocket and got your cards. And he hit you with the credit cards and the ATM card. He hit you for about $5,000 before you figured out what was going on. He spent the $5,000 on the young family. What's the difference between the doctor and the guy who took your cards? One last story. Many years ago, when I was on a college campus, I was walking down the sidewalk and there were 3 young ladies behind me, co-eds, talking about their majors and what they were doing. And one of the young ladies said, "I'm majoring in sociology." And her friends said, "Why sociology?" And she says, "Because I want to give other people money." Now, what you want to say to her is, why don't you go out then and earn a lot of money and you can give away all you have? But she didn't want to just give away money. She wanted to give away somebody else's money. Well, a few questions for the morning. When it comes to dishonesty, a whole lot of it relates to money, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at the dishonesty around you, what all takes place around you, and the things that maybe disturb you the most, many of those things are going to be related to money. Most of them directly related to money, some of them indirectly related to money. But money is a big part. Why is that? In the stories that we were looking at, it was easy to be generous with somebody else's money, wasn't it? The doctor could easily have taken the young lady and whatever family she wanted to take with her to a Holiday Inn and given the credit card and say, here, stay for a day and it'll take care of food and whatever you want. He could have done that. But somebody else's money is easier to spend. That's who we are and what happens in our lives, isn't it? It ties into so much of what we are and what we do. I mean, money is a big part of your life. I mean, no matter how much you want to minimize it, it's a big part of your life. Take it all away, and would your life change? If you didn't have any money at all, would your life change? In the kind of society in which we live today, it's an essential part of our life. We have to have that. It's a big part of our lives. And so wherever dishonesty is going to pop up, money has a pretty good likelihood of being involved because it's pretty well involved in almost everything that we do. We talk about treasures on earth and treasures in heaven, and I want to talk about this a little bit. What are our treasures on earth? Not just ours in this room, but people. What are the treasures on earth that people have? What's a treasure? Something of value, something we consider of value. Anything else you might want to add? Friendship?
Family and friends.
Family and friends? Okay. So it might go beyond the physical, but typically when we talk about our treasures on earth, we're typically talking about physical things, aren't we? Most of the time when we're talking about the treasure, we're talking about the physical, but it certainly can go beyond that. So what kinds of things are our treasures on earth? What do people treasure? Find of real value? Things? Okay. All kinds of material things. Oh yeah, it can be just something small and may be apparently valueless to a lot of people, but may be of extreme value to people who know something about it. In talking to people in retirement about preparing wills and letters, explaining how they want things handled, I used to talk about Grandma's yellow pie plate. Because it's something like Grandma's yellow pie plate that causes the fight in a family. I mean, you can settle things over money in some cases without too much difficulty, but that pie plate brings back memories and everybody wants the pie plate. You can't divide it up. And everybody has those memories about that and they want it. All kinds of things that are treasures on earth. What about treasures in heaven? You hear this. In fact, we're going to bring it back up again. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So what in the world are these treasures in heaven? Everlasting life? That's certainly a treasure, isn't it? I want to address that a little bit more a little later on, but I want us thinking about it from the beginning here as we think about it. Because that's a statement that we're told. Jesus tells us, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. The point I really want to make by the question is most of us haven't given much thought to that question, have we, over the years? We read that, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. We can all quote that, but have we really thought about what those treasures in heaven really are that we're to lay up? Well, we're going to talk about that some today. So how do these earthly treasures, whatever they are, these things that we find of great value here on this earth, the things that we find are important to us because they have all this value. How do we really use those things on earth?
Food, shelter, clothing, that sort of thing is basic. But that's everybody uses.
We have those things that take care of our needs, but we don't use all of our treasures just for our needs, do we? I don't use all my treasures for just my needs. And I suspect that not many of you do either. So we go beyond our needs. Then how do we use our treasures?
Make people jealous.
Look what I have that you don't have. What else? Enjoyment. Comfort, pleasure. I mean, there are all these things that we find.
You spend money you don't have to impress people you don't like.
There's a lot of truth in that common statement, isn't there? Spend money you don't have, impress people you don't like. It's not just to party, but we do party, and we do go for that comfort and the pleasure and just to have a good time. For in many cases, we spend as much of our treasure on the good time, the pleasure part, as we do upon needs, depending on how much we have. Why is anyone's happiness dependent upon those earthly treasures? So we're talking about happiness now. In many cases, people's happiness is dependent upon whatever they consider to be their earthly treasures, those things on earth that are very valuable to them, important to them. Their happiness is built on that. Why is that?
That's because their focus is not.
They have a focus on that kind of thing, don't they? They have a focus on what's comfortable and pleasurable. And so if that's going to be the case, then my happiness is built on those things, and I need all these earthly treasures in order to buy that comfort and that pleasure.
But just about all of us in here know someone or know of someone who has more money than God could give anybody, and they're the most unhappy people in the world.
Along that same line, we can look at that. We can also probably look at ourselves in the mirror and see somebody who has a whole lot. In fact, more than 90% of the people in the world. And yet we have a little bit of unhappiness there too as well, because it's not quite enough to give us all the comfort and all the pleasure that we want. Just a little more. Just a little more. I'd be happy if I could just have this. So why would anyone then choose to be generous with those earthly treasures when we don't have enough of them to buy all the comfort and the pleasure we want to be happy? So why would we give any of it away? Exactly. For those who are focused entirely upon that happiness and pleasure, I want it all for myself, I need it all for myself, and I'm not going to give anything to anybody else because I don't have it to give, because I still need it.
Or perhaps they see it as a way to accrue additional.
And, once I get to this level, then maybe I'll give some of it away. But until then, I just don't have enough. We can look at that and say, well, that's certainly true for people at this level or that level or that level, but it's true at whatever level you want to name.
They have a changed heart.
Has to be a change of heart. Has to be.
Give for a purpose that they see as important.
It's not natural, though, is it? It's not natural. We've talked a lot. We'll continue to talk about the natural man and the spiritual nature and a natural nature, natural man, the flesh, and the battle that goes on with those. But for the natural man, it is the pleasure. It is the happiness. It is the comfort. Those are the things that are important. And so you don't do this. Film clip I have for you this morning is from this movie, old movie. It can happen to you. The policeman, Charlie, buys a lottery ticket for his wife, Muriel, and they win. However, the day he buys the lottery ticket, he goes into a restaurant. His partner and Charlie get a call to go on an emergency. And Charlie goes to pay the ticket, and he doesn't have enough cash for a tip. He has the cash for the ticket, but not for a tip. So he tells the waitress, tell you what I'll do. I'll come back in tomorrow, and I'll either give you double the tip or half of whatever I win in the lottery. That was a promise. Well, they win the lottery, and so you got to get a chance to see greed and generosity at work, because Yvonne, the waitress, is going to fall into a good bit of money here if, in fact, this all goes through. So let's watch and see what happens.
I don't know. I mean, if he was a detective or an undercover cop, at least he would have some decent clothes, But that's not for him. He's got to wear that uniform.
I feel for you, honey, because you got driving ambition.
I know. I never pushed him enough. I mean, if he was on the take, at least I would say, okay, he has initiative.
My sister was...
I'm running out of patience. I tell you, I'm a person who needs money.
lotto jackpot has grown to over $64 million. We'll check the winning numbers when we return. Those numbers again are 6, 12, 16, 26, 64, 84. When we return, sports with Larry Lipschitz.
That's unbelievable.
That's 16 people that picked this number. Oh, God. That only leaves us with 4 million. We could live on that, right?
Oh, yeah. We could live on less even.
Well, look, let's just pray to God that nobody else calls in so we don't have to split it with them either. What? Charlie, you're making me nervous. What?
Honey. I've got something to tell you.
A complete stranger, Charlie!
I owed her a tip.
A tip? $2 million? Come on! The right thing your whole entire life for everybody else. Just this once, please. Do the right thing for us.
I gave her my word.
Charlie. Honey, do you love me?
Of course I love you.
Then stifle. Stifle and smell the flowers. For me.
How about we make it your choice? Door number 1, double the tip. Door number 2, half of what I won in the lottery.
My choice. Okay. Whatever. I'll take door number 2. I'll take half of the lottery. Pay up.
You're sure?
Positive.
Oh, actually, we were pretty lucky.
Oh, really? Did you win something?
We won something.
All right. What? We won something? What did we win?
$4 million.
Why are you doing this?
What?
This sick joke.
No, it's not a joke.
And you're telling me that you're actually going to split it with me?
A promise is a promise.
We look at that and we'd like to think that we're nothing like Muriel. However, it probably would cross the mind of just about everybody in here to stiffer. At least cut it down. If she doesn't know that we got 4, it could be some other number. We can negotiate this deal. So maybe we're a little bit more like Muriel than we think we are. And we like to think that we're a whole lot like Charlie, where a promise is a promise, and I'm going to pay over the $2 million. But Charlie struggled with this too. And I suspect that everybody in here would have struggled just a little bit with handing over $2 million to the waitress. Maybe some of us a little more than others, but I suspect that everybody would have a little bit of a struggle in maintaining the promise. Our story today is about the dishonest manager. They're in Luke 16. Most of it takes place in the first 7.5 verses. Jesus applies it to us in the next verse and a half, and then he gives some general teaching through the next 4 verses, and then he comes back and finishes the story in telling us about Pharisees who were nearby. In chapter 15, Jesus is giving some teachings to the disciples and the crowd that has come around him in the temple area, and the Pharisees are there too, keeping an eye on him. But he's doing this teaching, and he teaches about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son, that is the prodigal son. So all those are handled in chapter 15 of Luke. Then in the first part of chapter 16, he goes to this, and it's introduced by saying, Jesus said to the disciples. And we're going to learn later that the Pharisees are still nearby, and they're overhearing this whole thing. But the disciples are there, and the Pharisees are there. So it opens, and Jesus starts telling the story. And the story is about a man who's rich and he has a steward, he has a manager. He has somebody managing his affairs for him, which is not an uncommon thing. Lots of people who have a lot of money can't handle all the things that have to do with that money by themselves, and so they have people to help them manage all this stuff. So he has a manager. However, the manager is not a particularly honest man. He finds, like the doctor at the beginning of the story, and like the man who picked your pocket at the beginning of the session, and like the young lady on campus who wanted to spend other people's money, it's easy to be generous with somebody else's money, and particularly generous to yourself. I mean, if you can get your hands on this money, then you can take care of those comforts and pleasures that you want to tend to. So the dishonest manager somehow is abusing the funds, and so the word goes to the owner, the rich man. People are telling him that the manager is being dishonest. He's wasting his resources. We're not told how he's doing that. There is a charge against him by people going to the owner saying that he has been wasting your resources. Now, he can do that by putting them in his own pocket. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that he could do it, but he's wasting the resources. So the owner calls the manager in and challenges him, say, this is what I've heard, and if that's the case, you can't be manager anymore. In the story that Jesus tells, there's no apparent defense being made by the manager, which would imply guilt. And as we see a little bit farther in the story, he obviously is guilty because he's going to get even more guilty as time goes along. So the challenge is there, and so what the owner says to him is that you should turn in your accounts. We read this story and we read it too quickly sometimes because we have been entrusted as stewards with great resources that are not our own. God has made us stewards of lots of things in this world that He has put in our possession. Think about what you have in your possession, and we call it our own, and that's a mistake for us, is to think of my this and my that, when in fact God has given you this, entrusted you with this for a purpose. Have we been wasteful of the resources that God has given to us? I don't know about you, but I'd have to confess guilt immediately that I have been wasteful of all the blessings that have been put into my life. I mean, it is shameful. And I suspect that maybe some of you have had a similar problem, maybe not to the same degree, maybe worse, but of wasting resources that God has put in my possession as a steward of His. Now, this steward, this manager, is being called to account for what he has done. Is it possible that we might be called to account? We are all going to stand before Christ, each and every one of us. We are going to stand before Him. Could somebody possibly charge us with having wasted his resources? They could me. The manager looks at this, and this is an interesting part of the story that befuddles lots of folks. But the manager thinks about this, and he says, well, wait a minute, boy, I'm not going to get another job as a manager. If you're convicted of stealing from your company, is the company's competitor likely to say, hey, come on, I've got a job for you? Probably not. He says, I'm in a tough spot here. But he is a very smart man. He is very astute. And he figures out that he has a way out of this mess. What he'll do is he'll call in all these people who owe his master money, who have bought things from him, and still owe for some things that of which they've taken possession. He says to the one man, how many barrels of oil did you have? I have 100 barrels. He says, well, write a new ticket. We'll call it 50. Now, if you're the man who owed 100 barrels of oil and now it's been cut to 50, how do you feel? That's a pretty good deal, right? I mean, you just had your debt cut in half. Of course, the manager is being generous with the owner's money. It's easy to be generous with somebody else's money. But is it a shrewd move? Well, let me not use the word shrewd because that often carries a negative connotation, doesn't it? Is it an astute move? Is it a wise move on his part? Well, it's that perspective again that we had at the very beginning. If the world does not have a God, and it's just the natural world, that's all there is, that is a brilliant move, isn't it? There's no judgment. His truth, your truth, my truth, all the same truth, all that sort of stuff. In the natural world, that is a very astute, a very wise move on this manager's part. He's just going to take a little bit more of that owner's money and make it easier on himself. In fact, he might even have the books coming close to balancing by the time he presents the new information. There's no double entry bookkeeping here in these days, right? So it's a little simpler process. And so by the time he presents this information, he may be pretty close to even. It might not be as big a crime as it first appeared. Of course, it's a bigger crime because he's cheated again. But in the natural world, we're inclined to do that kind of thing, right? Get by for the moment. How do we handle this situation with the least damage to our reputation or to our pocketbook? Our pocketbook, not somebody else's pocketbook, but to my pocketbook. The next part is even more astounding. The first part of verse 8, the owner and the manager come back together, and the owner commends the manager for his shrewdness. If you were the boss and you had an employee who stole from you, and then he figures out some other plan to hide what he stole from you by stealing more from you, you're probably not going to pat him on the back and say, "Attaboy, way to go. I think I'll keep you on." But in the world, in the natural world, was he wise? Was he astute? Absolutely. It was shrewd, wasn't it? That was a clever call. If you read the words, it just says he commends him for his shrewdness. He doesn't say that the action was great. I'm glad you did that to me. He just said what you did was a very shrewd thing. And it was. As the owner, if he's cheating on you that way, you can appreciate the creativeness of the individual. And there are some pretty creative thieves out there who have done some amazing things. Bernie Madoff, an example. But there are people who have done some mighty fancy footwork to achieve some great theft. Very creative, very smart. Jesus is going to now apply this to us. Last half of verse 8 and in verse 9. He says, the sons of this world are more shrewd than the sons of light. Now, that's a strange kind of statement, and that's one that we kind of skip over because it's a little harder to deal with, so we just deal with this other stuff. It's more fun to talk about the other things. But this is an important thing he's saying here. Look at the way that this man, natural man, deals in this natural world, in the shrewdness, astuteness, the wisdom that he has, the creativity that he has in dealing with this situation. Then look at us, who try to function in a different way in a different world, and how we deal with that heavenly world and the heavenly treasures, whatever those are. But in dealing with the earthly treasures, that shrewdness that the manager demonstrated is very, very clever. Why aren't we as clever, creative in handling the heavenly treasures? The sons of this world are more shrewd than the sons of light. The sons of light, in dealing in this natural world, often mimic the sons of the darkness. And we often behave too much like that manager. We'll find a little way to maybe not be as extreme as he was, but we'll do a little something to tweak it to make sure that we don't suffer quite as much for a wrong that we've done, or that we can gain a little bit more than we might have gained in a different set of circumstances. So sometimes the sons of light tend to mimic the sons of darkness in dealing with the darkness. And that's not what we should be doing. But he's saying that the sons of light should have that kind of creativity in dealing with these heavenly treasures. The second part of this statement that Jesus applies to us now comes in verse 9. And this, again, is strange to a lot of people. He says, make friends, because that's what the manager was doing, wasn't it? He was making friends with these people who owed the owner this debt. So he's getting them on his side by cutting that debt for them. He says here, make friends by means of unrighteous wealth. That doesn't mean to go out and copy what the manager did and be as sneaky as he was and do all that kind of thing. That's not what that's saying. But he's saying that with this unrighteous wealth, with these earthly treasures that we have, the money, the physical things that we have, the houses, the cars, the boats, whatever toys you want to name, with those physical earthly treasures that we have, make friends by means of those. And we're going to get a clearer picture of what this means. It's not like the people who owed them the owner. But he goes on, he says, so that when it fails. That's something we haven't mentioned yet. All the earthly treasures that we have, the houses, the cars, the boats, the money, the bonds, whatever stocks, whatever you want to name, the gold, the silver, all the stuff, all those physical earthly treasures that we have, they all fail at some point. They all fail. Either they rot away, you get termites in the house, the boat sinks out on the reservoir. All kinds of stuff happens. And the earthly treasures all go away. If you live long enough, and maybe some of these things kind of live as long as you do, like the gold bar probably isn't going to melt unless something catastrophic happens. But you're going to die. And the day that you die, what's the value to you of all those earthly treasures you have? Absolutely zero. Those earthly treasures, every one of them, worthless on that day. So that when it fails, make friends with those earthly treasures so that when it fails, you're going to have people welcoming you into the eternal dwellings. If you use the earthly treasures for the heavenly things, then when you get to heaven, there are going to be people there who are going to be glad to see you because you, through those earthly treasures, helped them in getting there. So Jesus has just taken this very strange story and brought it home to you and to me. Now he goes on. He says, one who's faithful in a little will be faithful in much. If he's dishonest in a little, he's going to be dishonest in much. We can often tell how a person's going to behave just by how he handles little things. Just watch them in little ordinary things, and you can pretty well tell how they're going to behave. Not in every case, but in general, that's a true statement. He says also that if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, in those earthly treasures, if you have not been faithful in the handling of earthly treasures, how are you going to be faithful in anything that's a true wealth, the heavenly treasure? Well, that's kind of a blow to me. I don't know how it hits you, but that's a blow because I've not always been faithful in the handling of the unrighteous wealth. So how am I trustworthy then for the true wealth, which is going to be the heavenly wealth? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, that's what the steward was doing, the manager's doing, and that's what we do with those things that God has entrusted to us as stewards on his behalf. That's his, not ours, although we call it ours too many times. It's his. We're managers of it. And if we're unfaithful in the managing of that which is another's, how are we going to be entrusted with those gifts that he's going to give us that are ours for eternity? We're untrustworthy. Now he's getting into the real hard stuff. And then you cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God and money. Now we've heard that before. That's another place in Scripture. And we're going to come back to it in a moment. And that's in the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, he uses that same statement. You cannot serve God and money. So here a little later in time, he's telling this story to the disciples, and he brings that point back up again. You cannot serve God and money. So all these earthly treasures, be careful that you're not serving those new gods in your life, that you have decided to serve them instead of the real owner. Now he goes back to the Pharisees. Verse 14. The Pharisees ridiculed him. The Pharisees heard this, recognized what he was saying and how it applied to them. And because they are covetous, because they are after comfort and pleasure, they put up a natural defense. And the natural defense is to ridicule the person who's reminding you of your shortfall. And I'm sure that you've seen that happen in your lives with people around you, in your own life perhaps, where somebody is confronted for an error in their ways and they attack back, often through ridicule of the person who has shown them the problem. And we shoot the messenger. And then he adds to that, what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. All those things that we exalt, those treasures on earth that we lift up, can be an abomination if they are from our natural man, as if it's what we naturally desire. Let me take you to the Sermon on the Mount where he says, those treasures on earth, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust have no effect and thieves can't get to it. So you have those things out there that are going to go away anyway. And then you have these things that are eternal. The happiness of most people in life is based upon those things back here on earth. That's where happiness is. Steve's been talking for several weeks, and we'll talk for the next few weeks about the Beatitudes. And that is about the blessings. And those are the gifts that God gives us that are eternal. Those things that God gives us that are never going away. And it's here where he says you cannot serve two masters and you cannot serve both God and mammon. That's in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. If you look at the Beatitudes, I want to tie this lesson with Steve's sermons for just a moment and kind of bring this back together. In the Beatitudes, what are the blessings? What are the gifts that God gives to his people? The blessings, the kingdom of heaven. It begins with the kingdom of heaven. He ends with the kingdom of heaven. He talks about being called sons of God, about seeing God, being with God, called his children, and then having the comfort, satisfaction, and mercy. Those non-tangible things that we really desire to have in our lives. This is an indication of the kind of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about treasures of heaven. Those gifts that God gives to us that are eternal, that we will have in full abundance in heaven. Who gets those? There are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, and so on. These blessings that he's giving, those heavenly treasures, that should be our objective, not the earthly treasures that are all going to go away. At some point in time, you'll have them no more.
I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.